I'm accompanied by my children. Squishmallows. Oh, sorry, Gordon. Hi, I'm Morgan. Welcome to my channel. And today I'm going to be doing a pretty large wrap-up. So, uni decided to kick me in the arse, and I haven't done an actual wrap-up since January, I believe. Yes, I have my February notes here in front of me. So I'm going to be talking about the books I read in February, March and April. Didn't read a lot because, you know, university. But I'm going to talk about them now. Okay, so first of all, books that I read in February. And the first book I read was Hero by Perry Moore. And this is welcome to Morgan cleans out the TBR she's had since she was 13. Literally, I need to start buying all these books that have been on my TBR since 2013. Anyway, I gave this like 2 stars. It was something. This is, I believe, a YA novel that is set in a universe where superheroes are real. It's very reminiscent of like the Avengers and the Justice League. Our main character is the son of a former superhero who's human / unpowered, and Tom, the main character, has superpowers but doesn't want to tell his dad because his dad really doesn't like superpowered superheroes anymore. Tom is also gay and hiding this from his dad for similar reasons. So Tom secretly joins a kind of offshoot of the main superhero group and starts to kind of figure out a lot of the lies and secrecy that are involved in the lives of a lot of these superheroes. And he's working to figure it out for his family and his friends who he's made in this superhero group as superheroes are starting to be killed off. It wasn't terrible, but the writing was not good. The premise and the story, however, you know, were actually alright, which was how I managed to finish said book. The writing wasn't terrible, like horrific, I can't read this, I need to put it down. It just wasn't very good either. I believe this is the only book the guy Perry Moore has ever written, so I get the impression he's not a novelist. This is just a story that he wanted to tell, which I can appreciate. Like with many of the books that I end up giving 2 stars, too many things happened in this book that weren't given the weight they should have been given. Because, like, the whole idea of the story is really cool. It's a gay superhero juggling all these secrets. It's interesting. And it works really well because, you know, it's 2 different secrets hiding 2 different parts of yourself. I'm not gonna read this again, like, at all. I don't know if I'd really recommend it, but it did have a good and interesting exploration of being a young gay man trying to find his place in the world. Tom is, I believe, 16, and you know, that is why I think I wrote it down on my TBR all those years ago. I just thought that was a really interesting and honestly powerful story. I just think that the writing didn't really do it justice, although I can see what Moore was trying to do. Okay, next we have a comic, and that is Batman Year One by Frank Miller. It's too much light, there we go. I gave this 4 stars, and I mean, I enjoyed it when I read it, but I've kind of forgotten all of the events that actually happen in it. I'm left with kind of a vague idea and like the vibes of it, so I don't really know what that means. It's Batman Year One. It's the basics. It's about Bruce Wayne coming home from all of his wild ninja training and starting to become Batman, figuring out how he's going to do the things he wants to do and stop crime and how he's going to fit in the city, and you know, all the cops are corrupt and all that kind of thing. I'm pretty sure we met Selena. I don't really remember, but I do love her. So I'm pretty sure we met her and I was like, yes, hello. So I did enjoy the story. I enjoyed Bruce kind of not being perfect, which a lot of the time people are like, he's Batman, he knows what he's doing, he's prepared for every eventuality. But like in this, he's like 20 something. The man is finding his feet. He's a traumatized, rich 20 something who dresses up like a bat to fight crime. It was never going to be simple. I also really enjoyed the inclusion of Jim Gordon's story alongside Bruce's, and how they were both kind of finding their feet in the city and deciding how they were going to fight crime themselves, because obviously Jim Gordon is surrounded by the corrupt GCPD. And I did actually really like the art in this, which I don't like a lot of comic book art, like traditional comic book art. I just think it's ugly. But I actually quite like this, and I enjoyed reading the two stories side by side. It just didn't leave as big an impression as I kind of thought it would. But it is good, and I think it's a good kind of introduction to the story of Batman. So the next book I read in February was The Tempest by William Shakespeare. This is a very small book. I will hold it here. I gave it 3 stars. It was a reread for university and my rating didn't change. It's... oh, I was about to say the genre, but I don't actually know if this is technically a tragedy or a comedy or whatever. It's in a weird kind of in-between place, because by the end, everything's fine. So, you know. It's about a bunch of Italian nobles who crash on an island, and the magic user that they banished there years ago seeks his revenge. I like The Tempest. It's fun in a theatre way, but also in a literature way, because of all of the, you know, complicated Shakespeare metaphors and imagery and all that kind of thing. It works well in The Tempest. As you can see, I have a whole bunch of notes from some lovely uses of words and metaphors, because I wrote an essay. This is definitely a Shakespeare play that I would recommend, and it's probably a lot more fun than the other kind of main plays that people recommend, because when people recommend Shakespeare, they tend to just recommend pure tragedy, and while this isn't a pure comedy, it's definitely enjoyable. Next, I read In a Glass Darkly by Sheridan Le Fanu, which is actually a collection of, I think, 4 short stories, mostly kind of in the Victorian Gothic genre. I bought it for university because I needed to read Carmilla, which I absolutely love. Carmilla is one of my favourite Gothic stories, and it's at the back, as you can see. And as always, Carmilla is worth it. It's definitely worth buying a physical copy, in my opinion. The other stories were good. They were suitably Gothic and kind of weird. They just didn't stand out as much to me compared to Carmilla, to the point where I don't really remember a lot of what happened in the stories. I feel like if I was to kind of glance at them again, like glance at the name and maybe the first couple of pages, I would remember. But when I wrote my notes for this in like February, I said that I could only really remember like 2 of the stories, and now I can't actually remember what else is in the book. I also never figured out that Sheridan Le Fanu was a man, and I had convinced myself that it was a female written vampire story. Female written lesbian vampire story. It was not, however. And that was disappointing. I liked being in my ignorant world. That was a good place to be. But anyway, read Carmilla. The next book I read was Fall of the Governor Part 1 by Jay Bonansinga and Robert Kirkman. I gave this 2 stars. I've said already when I talked about the first 2 books that I thought this series was going to be really mediocre. This did nothing to prove that wrong at all. So book 3 in this series truly introduces us to the governor and Woodbury, and starts to show us just how much he is losing his grip on reality, you know, as if that wasn't already kind of obvious, what with the taking on his brother's whole entire personality thing. This is the first part of the governor arc from the comics, seen from the side of the Woodbury citizens, and it shows just how the governor manipulates his people and how their fear allows them to turn against Rick's people who they don't even know. Nothing really stood out in a good way or a bad way. Like, it wasn't horrific, it's just very mediocre. And Lily, the character who we're supposed to kind of follow and support, I suppose, is just very wishy-washy as a character. Also, okay, so slight spoilers here if you've never read, listened to, watched, whatever, any of the Walking Dead stuff, because this is a part of the comics and I believe also the TV show. I can't quite remember what happens in the TV show. It was a very long time ago. But basically, Michonne gets her revenge, tortures the governor, and it was very graphic. I think it was a little too graphic, in my opinion. I mean, the torture of Michonne was supposed to show us how depraved the governor really is, but I don't know if we had to see it the way we did. Like, we also see that, like, Michonne refuses to break, she's a strong woman. I just don't think we had to see it in the detail that we saw it. And then her revenge, again, it's good that they also showed that in detail, you know, not just like the assault of a woman but not the assault of the man. At least that was slightly equal. But I still don't think really we had to see either of them the way we did. That kind of left a sour taste in my mouth at the end of the book. So those are all the books that I read in February, and now we'll go on to March. I was dead happy when I said that there, as if I've got lots to talk about in March. I really don't. I really don't. So in March, I didn't read a lot. I believe I only have 2 books to talk about. I was really busy with my university essays and racing to finish Paradise Lost. So the first book I read was Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. This is a translated Russian sci-fi. I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. It was one of the required readings for my Soviet literature class, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I'm really glad I read this. It's set in a kind of liminal place in this small town. It's not Russia, but it's also not Russia. It's complicated. And the town is one of, I believe, 6, it's like 5 or 6, who were visited by aliens. If you've read or seen Annihilation, think the Shimmer or Area X, whichever one you refer to it as, that is very much the vibe we get about the zone in Roadside Picnic. We mostly follow the character of Red, who is what's known as a stalker, someone who sneaks into the zone to bring back alien artifacts and sell them on the black market. The book is split into 4 kind of chapters / sections that follows Red over the course of something like 10 years of his life. Like I already said, I really, really loved this. I loved the writing, I loved the atmosphere that was created. For some reason people don't like this. Like, we looked at some opinions in the class and a lot of like people reviewing it online didn't like it. And some people in my class didn't like it, although more people did, and I think our teacher was slightly surprised. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it, and I don't know, I think maybe it's just our generation who's just like, the world's falling apart, let's steal some alien stuff, you know? It's weirdly scientific and also not scientific, and it just creates such an interesting world well focused on this one small town, and I absolutely devoured it. The only other thing that I read in March was Paradise Lost by John Milton. It looks small, but that is deceiving, because not only is the typeface quite small, it's also a story in verse written in fucking Renaissance times, so it's hard. It's a hard slog. I gave it 3 stars. This was actually a reread, didn't change my rating of it in any way whatsoever. I don't really have a lot to say about it. It's basically just a retelling of the story of the creation of man from Genesis, the book of Genesis, but with like a focus on Satan more. Like, that's pretty much it. It's one of the things that people like to say is Bible fan fiction. You know, like Inferno. Inferno is technically Bible fan fiction, self-insert fan fiction. This is technically Bible fan fiction. It is, however, an interesting read, especially when you start noticing all of the references and callbacks in the text, which is obviously what I did because I was reading it for university and we were talking about all the kind of interlinking metaphors and all that kind of thing. I think studying it and analysing the text made it a lot more interesting and a lot more enjoyable, which I find can be common for really hard to read classics. Not all classics. Personally, I enjoy like Jane Austen just as a book, but a really complicated classic, a classic that you maybe find the language really hard to read, it is probably easier to read it critically and slowly, although I did have to rush to finish this for my class. But yeah, I did enjoy it. I wouldn't say it's terrible, and if you're a big literature nerd and you like to read all of the classics, this is a good one. And now we're on to what I read in April, which I actually read quite a bit. as in surprisingly a bit. The first book I read was Daughters of Decadence, and it's by various different authors. This is a short story collection which collects stories by female writers of the fin de siècle? I don't know, it's there. Which is kind of like the late Victorian period. And I gave it 3 stars. It was an interesting collection. It had kind of a lot of different types of stories. You know, there was quite a kind of variation in the writing and, you know, what they focused on and things like that. Although they all mostly focused on like women or something kind of gothic or supernatural. And I bought this for the yellow wallpaper, which I had to do for class. Surprise, surprise. But it's also one of my favourite short stories. I love the yellow wallpaper. But I did enjoy reading the rest of the collection because, you know, the Victorian Gothic and kind of the late Victorian period is something that I'm interested in literature-wise. Although I did think that it was weird that some of the stories were so similar. Like they were basically telling the same story. I'm not sure why. Don't really know what that was about at all. It was fine, like, as a collection. Some of them were really good and some of them were mediocre. And that's honestly quite par for the course for a short story collection, especially one with various authors and not just one author who's creating the whole through line. Next, I read The Fall of the Governor Part 2 by Robert Kirkman and J. Bonansinga. This is Part 2 to the Part 1 that I mentioned earlier. And again, I did give it 2 stars. At this point, I'm just finishing the series out of stubbornness, to be quite honest. I'm halfway through and I'm gonna finish it. This is the second half of the Governor arc from the comics, and it follows it from a Woodbury perspective. Same as Part 1, just continuing the story. I feel like I keep saying the same things for every book in this series because they're not bad, but they're not good either. Some parts are really enjoyable, and, you know, some parts are better written than other parts, but some parts are just not. I've been really let down by Lily's character because I was very excited to have a female main character that we're following through the world of The Walking Dead, but she's just very inconsistent, as in her characterization, not as a person. Well, I mean also as a person, but it's due to her characterization. The inconsistency is not a part of her, it's due to the writing. And we see this especially in her feelings towards the governor, which really should not be as inconsistent as they are. In this book, she supports him. Like, she chooses to support him, which doesn't make really any sense at all to me because she's already seen what he's capable of. She's seen the kind of person that he is behind the mask. She recognises that part of him. And I, for one, do not believe that her being pregnant would change her beliefs around the governor. She wants Woodbury to work for her baby. That doesn't mean that the governor is needed. Personally, I think that would have brought her back to the way she was in the second book, where... Was it the second book? Was it the last book? Second or third book, where she and Martinez and some of the others try to basically have a coup. And personally, I think that's where she would be. I feel like it would bring her back to this secret, seething, waiting, protecting herself. And I'm not saying that she wouldn't outwardly support the governor, but she supports him inwardly. She tells herself that she supports him because he's the only one who can do what needs to be done. I just don't believe that's the way it would be. If there had been more of a kind of internal look at how she didn't want to do this, but she had to, then maybe it would be more believable. But I feel like for her inner self, they just changed it completely. They were just like, oh no, but she's okay with him now. She knows he's a bad guy, but she's okay with him. And I just did not see that happening at all. I did enjoy seeing the prison conflict from the Woodbury point of view, showing that, you know, they were all just scared, normal people, the same as Rick's group who are in the prison. They're just doing their best, which is what you see kind of in that end section where there's actually the conflict at the prison, but that didn't redeem the book enough in my eyes to give it more than 2 stars. Next, we have The Walls Have Eyes by Claire B. Dunkel. I almost blanked on her name there. I gave this 3 stars. This is a sequel to The Sky Inside, which is a kind of futuristic, capitalistic world where everyone lives in these perfect suburbs that are like completely controlled and isolated inside like domes. More domes. Why are there so many domes? And in the first book, The Sky Inside, a young boy and his dog basically discover all these like secrets and weird things and bad things that are going on in his suburb and kind of in general. After he goes looking for his sister, whose generation is recalled because the kids are basically sold like things. Little weird. It's a very capitalistic society. It's the way they function. And these kids are wonder babies, and they basically say, oh no, they're defective, bring them all back. And he's like, no, that's my little sister, and he goes searching for her. This is a continuation of that story. Martin decides to get his parents out and also has to look for his sister for a bit again, and just kind of wants to help the wonder babies in general. He's like 13 and he's like, the world is bad, I must help these children. I don't even know if he's 13, I think he might be younger than that. Maybe like 12. That's not a big difference, but like it is. I think this is kind of what is like called middle grade, like preteen, early teen. So I'm definitely not the target audience for it whatsoever, even though I do enjoy a good YA. I preferred the first book. I didn't think this was as good. But I did still enjoy the exploration of materialism and corruption in leadership that was done in a way that could be both entertaining to children and also informative, you know, so that they can kind of understand things. Again, when I say children, I mean children who are old enough to understand these things and form their own opinions, but, you know, maybe aren't quite at the more complicated YA stage. Personally, I thought some parts of the plot were a little far-fetched and kind of, what's the word? Convenient? Which kind of just made it not as enjoyable for me. But again, it is a kind of preteen pseudo sci-fi, so I'm not really going to complain that much. Then I read We by Yevgeny Zamyatin and Roadside Picnic by Boris and Arkady Strugatsky again. Both of these were rereads. I believe I talked about We in my January wrap-up. Might have been before that, might have been last year. Not entirely sure. But yeah, these were rereads for an essay and neither of them changed in my reviewing. 3 stars, 5 stars. This is definitely an interesting take on utopia/dystopia, and as I already said, I love Roadside Picnic, so. And the last book I have to talk about is The Sky is Everywhere by Jandy Nelson. I gave this 5 stars. I love Jandy Nelson. She's only written 2 books, and I've read both of them, and both of them made me cry, and I gave both of them 5 stars, and I just love how this woman writes. I would sell my soul both to her and for her. What a writer. This book follows Lenny, whose sister recently passed completely out of the blue. She was like 19, and Lenny is trying to figure out who she is and where she fits into the world without her sister. Her sister was her best friend and her other half, and Lenny finds it really, really hard to deal with the grief. But she also kind of finds herself falling in love at the same time and feels like that should not be something that she should be doing. Jandy Nelson is just phenomenal at writing emotion, particularly grief, because this focuses on grief, and the other book, which is, it's one of my favourite books, I'll Give You the Sun. I completely forgot the name of it there. That also focuses a lot on grief, familial grief. I really enjoyed the exploration of different family structures in this, and kind of the idea of how grief affects everyone who knew someone. Once someone passes, it's not just the close family. Grief affects everyone who knew the person. The inclusion of Lenny's poetry and scraps of her writing, I think, really helped us kind of understand Lenny in a different way, and truly understand how she was feeling and how she was processing her grief internally. So much of Jandy Nelson's work shows the intricate and weird parts of familial relationships that might seem peculiar to outsiders but are just a comforting and normal part of the family's lives. And just overall, how she writes makes me cry. Like, I don't really have any other way to put it. Her way with words just has a direct line to my soul, and I really, really hope that she writes some more books, or pretty much anything. I'll pick up anything at this point. And that's me. Those are all the books that I have read recently. It's currently May. I'm going to be doing a May wrap up at the end of May, funnily enough. But those are all the books that I've read that you haven't heard about yet. If you've made it to the end, I'd love it if you could like, comment, subscribe. Come chat to me in the comments down below. Come chat to me on my social medias, which will be linked down below. Let me know if you've read any of these books and you liked them or disliked them, or if you plan to read any of them. I always like hearing. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!